Have you ever found yourself reacting to something in a way that felt bigger than the moment itself? Maybe your partner forgot to call you when they said that they would, and suddenly you feel this wave of anxiety and abandonment wash over you. Or maybe someone gives you feedback, those moments at work where someone tells you that you missed something, or maybe even a friend saying that you did something that hurt them. And instead of taking it in, you end up feeling ashamed, or maybe you even get defensive. In these moments, it's almost as if you've been transported back to a younger version of yourself. That right there is your inner child showing up. And if we don't recognize it, we can get stuck in these tricky patterns of blame, criticism, defensiveness, avoidance. And really, what we're doing is we're replaying the same reactions over and over again. So today, I'm so glad that you clicked play because I'm going to walk you through how you can identify your inner child when your inner child is running the show, and how I've also experienced this in my own life. But I want to leave you with some healing strategies so that you can move forward. And when I thought about today's episode, I have to be honest with you because that's what we're doing this season. I'm doing some of those hard things. This is a conversation I have wanted to have for a really long time. But what kept getting in the way for me? Perfectionism. It's such a theme. I would say to myself, I'm not going to cover it right. I won't give all the details. I won't be able to do all the things. And yet this is a topic that I just absolutely love. Like I feel it inside of me as a therapist. These are the moments that spark this connectivity and give me the tingles when I'm sitting with clients when we're doing this work. And I have to be honest, I got a little frustrated with myself for getting stuck in this perfectionism to present this topic to you. But here we are because it's the theme of the season and we are not going to show up perfectly. So I'm going to start by saying how much I have loved reading everyone I've come across on Instagram. This trend around, I met my younger self for coffee today, because it is just this beautiful way of expressing what it means to see the struggle in those younger parts of us. So let's first talk about what is the inner child. The inner child here is really this part of us. It's not that there's like a small child inside of us, but instead it's the younger parts of us that we hold on to that represent those early wounds and unmet needs and longings. So when we were little, when we're younger, there are these moments that we have. Some can recall and some don't, where we didn't get the needs met, where we didn't get what we wanted, needed, longed for. We're not talking about that you wanted to go to the park and your parents said no. We're talking about the emotional experience early on. And this shapes how we respond as adults. And also, if I think of that example of wanting to go to the park and your parent says no, that's not necessarily something that's going to show up as part of your inner child, but it's more the piece of if your parent leaves you in the emotional experience that you're having, or if they criticize you or blame you or they stonewall you. Those are the moments that are really going to show up that represent these unhealed parts of us. So when we're younger, we don't have the ability to process or make sense of certain experiences, and they end up then being stored in our body, in our nervous systems. And the way I like to describe this is it's like walking down a road or a trail in our brains. And there's this moment where something happens in front of us. We can use the word trigger. Something happens in front of us, and your brain goes down this well-traveled path of that experience from your past. And when we do healing work, we then look to see what were those deeper needs at the time. We can give that to ourselves, but then we also then want to start creating new pathways. We want to travel different paths so that we have different experiences as an adult. So oftentimes, without even realizing it, these younger parts of ourselves end up showing up, especially in our relationships and even more during times of stress. I remember working with one client who would say that he got so frustrated by his wife's criticisms of him. And his wife would say, well, I'm just trying to help him out, or I'm just trying to make this go faster, or I'm just trying to get us to be on the same page and move forward and get the kids to bed, all the things. And when we were able to start going deeper into what was this hitting inside for him, what was this really about, is that he shared with me that he remembers growing up with his single mom, and she was always home with him. And him as the only child, she would give him all of this attention, but the attention wasn't necessarily always good because when he just wanted to do something in the kitchen or cleaning up his room, she would be standing over him, telling him and dictating how to do things. And so you can imagine that in those moments with his wife today, he's taken right back to when he was 7 years old with his mom saying, you're doing it wrong. You have to do it this way. Here, use this instead of that. And that was the inner child there that was showing up in the dynamic in their relationship. They would get stuck in that kind of common cycle that couples get stuck in, which is that blame, defend cycle. I'm so excited to bring you my next book because one of the chapters is all about the baggage that we bring into this particular dynamic. If you don't know already, the book is titled You, Your Husband, and His Mother. And of course, there's all these different relationships happening between you and your husband and his mother, you and his mother. And one of the pieces I walk you through in this book is around looking at the baggage we bring into this relationship. I think this is so important for us. And part of that I go through are the different types of inner childs that tend to show up for ourselves and in the relationship. So the book is not released yet. You're going to be the first to know when pre-orders are available and all the fun things that are going to come with book launches. I love book launches, and I had so much fun releasing my first book. So I know this one is going to be so much fun. But let's talk about how you can start to identify when your inner child is running the show. We want to know what this looks like because when we have this awareness, then we can start slowing things down, identify what we need, and then also give ourselves the things that we need. That's the thing about being an adult now. We don't shame or blame our parents. They did their best with what they had. They broke some cycles, and yet we have needs. And now as an adult, we have that sense of agency that we can do this for ourselves. It's incredibly powerful. So I think it's important for you to recognize what are some of those hot button moments when your inner child starts to show up. One of these common experiences is when your reaction feels so much bigger than to the moment itself. And oftentimes that's when your inner child is speaking. I can remember one client sharing this defensive moment that she had with family and having a very close relationship with her family and feeling really confused about it. And so she got really defensive and then afterwards went into this shame spiral about how she acted. And of course, that shame spiral is something that we need to acknowledge. We don't want to get stuck in it. Shame does keep us stuck, but we want to be able to recognize first, hang on, we all have these moments. We all get stuck in this. This doesn't make you a bad person. And how powerful it is then that you can see that your inner child shows up in these moments. Of course, it makes sense coming in with a lot of compassion. But when we looked at that defensiveness, we were really able to see that it wasn't the moment that was really bothering her, but rather this kind of long history of never feeling heard and understood. That was the trigger for this person. I don't feel heard. I don't feel understood. My opinion is not being considered. I'm not being considered here. And one of the reasons why I love doing this work so much is just to see the reaction of people when they can identify their inner child, but also the strategies around offering that sense of compassion. And so in that session, I had framed this as almost like, I totally get this. This is like one of those moments where your inner child shows up and she's loud and she gets defensive and she's protecting you. Of course, that's what she wants to do because deep down inside, she really doesn't feel seen. And it's almost as if you need to look over your shoulder and say, hey, I see you. I see you, little, and, use your name. I see you, little one, and I've got you. I'm going to look after this here. And I think that can be such a powerful experience when you recognize when your inner child is showing up. How do we know that your inner child is being activated? I think that first piece is that reaction feels really big and out of proportion to what's happening. And those moments never feel good. We also have to make sure we're not covering it up by shame and dismissing it and blaming everybody else for, if they just didn't say those things, then I wouldn't have done the stuff. No, we have to go inside and say, okay, hang on. I did the stuff and the stuff didn't feel so good. So what's really happening for me? So we can often look at big reactive emotions where maybe you felt really small, maybe you felt helpless, or maybe you felt out of control. Those would be some really good things to look for. But you can also look for those times where your nervous system is activated. I talk about nervous system in episode 5 of this season. So go check that episode out. But that's the experience where you go into fight or flight. So that is, this is dangerous. I'm going to fight. I'm going to argue. Anger is showing up. Flight is, I'm getting out of there. Forget it. I'm not addressing this. Then we've got freezing, which is shutting down. Or we also have fawning, which is people pleasing. So in these moments where the emotions feel so big, where it's like this overwhelm, or you're acting in a way that doesn't really feel congruent to who you are, then start to look for that old story that's replaying inside of you. I'm going to tell you about a time. I haven't talked about this on social before, and there's a reason I don't, and that is because and truthfully, the negative things that have happened on social in my community have been so far and few between. You are all so amazing and supportive, and you ask questions in this very considerate and compassionate way, and I just love the space that we have built. So when this negative experience happened, it's always my intention to not feed into that negativity. But it was a really big one. And so I want to share it here just to give you an example of when my inner child was up and running, because there were some elements within this that really helped me just to understand what that voice sounds like, and then also what I needed in that moment. And it was this, it was an uncomfortable and really hard experience. But I'm thankful for this experience because it showed this deeper part of me that I'm still working through. So, this recent event was an experience of online bullying where someone took my video and then shamed and blamed me afterwards, rather than having context within the video and talking about a different perspective. Having different perspectives is okay, but to blame and shame me as a professional and to question my ethics was incredibly hurtful and damaging. And in that moment, I felt myself get so small. And the story that I know that is so familiar for me immediately showed up. And that is, look, you did it wrong. You are not enough. There's proof right here. And the thoughts for me are often what comes first. I can hear those first, and then I could feel the physical sensations. And that, when we're trying to identify our inner child, that is so important. We want to understand what's happening in my body. And that's the piece around understanding our nervous systems as well. When I'm in a fight or flight, my chest is pounding. Maybe there's an elephant sitting in my chest. I'm agitated. I'm kind of, shaking my leg. That's a good fight or flight sign for me. But this was a freezing moment. I was shutting down. I was sitting in the kind of corner of our couch, and I just felt like I was in darkness. Actually, I think we had put the kids to bed, and so I was sitting in the living room, having not put lights on just yet. And then what came next for me was the image of little Tracy. And I was right back inside my childhood bedroom, not just in my bedroom, but in the closet with the door closed. And it was dark. And I just heard myself say over and over again, I'm not enough. You're so stupid. You did this wrong thing. And, it's so interesting to be a parent right now to a child who I could see at the same age. And one of my kids actually just recently, this story really chokes me up, is that um, this kid, and again, if you don't know and you're new to the podcast, I say this kid so that I protect some privacy for my kids because I have a boy and a girl. And so if I say he or she, you know who I'm talking about. But this child had a particularly tough night. And when I went to this child's room to help do some regulation and to invite the child back to join us as a family, there was this just complete shame spiral. And this kid started to say, "I'm such a bad kid. I'm so stupid. I should have. I'm such a bad kid. I'm stupid." And it just started to escalate. And I could see in these moments what it would have been like on my own. And again, I can't emphasize enough, I don't shame or blame my parents because they did such a fantastic job. We all have our moments, we all have our stuff. And I remember being that small kid in the closet, just saying to myself, "You are not enough. You are not enough. You are not enough. You're bad. You're stupid." And seeing my own child do that, it's just one of those moments where, wow, this work feels so heavy because not only in these moments am I parenting my child and trying to say to this kid, "You are a good kid. You're so loved. You made a choice that doesn't feel good anymore. But I'm going to tell you, we love you. There's nothing that we can do that will stop us from loving you." And yet, at the same time, how exhausting it is then to also be trying to reparent ourselves. Because, wow, that little girl sitting in her closet really needed that. She really needed to hear that. This actually reminds me of a conversation I was having with a client. And this is around the people who really struggle with remembering their childhood, or they say, "I had a good childhood. There were no bad things, no negative things that happened." And it's a really interesting experience because, of course, we know, and I've fully accepted this. My children will go to therapy and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, my mom was a psychologist and always asking me, how did you feel about that?" But in a way, it's not, the thing is, it's not possible to get it right all the time. Like, we're not perfect parents. We're not supposed to be perfect parents. We're going to break some of the cycles and our kids are going to struggle a little bit. Okay. So I know that when I work with a client, perhaps they're more avoidant. And they say, "I don't have these memories and I had a good childhood." I know there's stuff in there, but one of the things that I was talking about with this client is around how even if you don't have those memories, look to see what your triggers are. Because this parent in particular was getting triggered by the anger of their child. It would send them right into their own anger. And I think it's Dr. Shafali who teaches us this, one of her books, The Parenting Map, which is a fantastic one. Highly recommended. Whatever it is that's triggering you is reminding you of those unmet needs and longings that you had as a child. And so it was interesting though, because I had framed it in a way to this client that, you might not be able to access some of those memories, but instead we want to look at maybe even the absence of things. Was there someone there when you had a really hard day? What did they do? And did that feel good for you? Because sometimes while parents are present and you have everything that you need, they might not be there for you in those times when you were distressed, anxious, and upset. And it's in the absence of those things that you learn what to do with your emotions, that you learn to shut down, that you learn to keep it to yourself and to not share things with anybody else. And then you have these triggers as an adult. That is still your inner child in there. That's still that younger part of you showing up. Okay, so how do we recognize when our inner child is showing up? That is when we want to be able to say, "Okay, what's happening right here? What's the reaction? What's happening inside my body? What are the thoughts that I'm having? What are the memories that are showing up here?" That might also be helpful. What emotions are showing up? And I want to really emphasize that in order to be able to do any of this healing, we really do need to be able to recognize when your inner child shows up. Okay, awareness is first, always first. We need awareness, but as Lori Gottlieb said, and maybe you should talk to someone, and I loved her book. Um, Awareness is, or insight, I think she says, is the quote is, "Insight is the booby prize of therapy." The real work is when we start to change things. So let's talk about healing your inner child. And healing happens when we start to give ourselves the things that we need that we didn't get as a child. So, first, awareness. We need to recognize when it's happening. And as cliche as this is, and I know so many people say it in so many different ways, but I'm going to say it again. I know people don't like this one. You got to pause. You have to pause. Just pause and slow down and just get curious. Get a little curious about what's happening in that moment. Your partner doesn't respond to your text. You're waiting, you're waiting, you're waiting. They haven't responded. What's happening for you in that moment? Instead of going on that autopilot or reacting quickly in it, slow it down. Don't snap out the text and be like, oh, I guess you don't even care about me. You're abandoning me. You don't love me. No, 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 no. There's so much going on in the context of your partner's world that you don't know in that moment. Let's just slow it right down. Slow down and ask yourself, what is happening in this moment for me? How am I feeling? And I know already throughout this season, you are hearing me say this work in our relationship all comes into how am I showing up? What are the choices I make? What am I doing in these moments? What are the risks that I'm willing to take? That's how our relationships start to change. So that is step number one, recognize the moment. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you about those moments when your inner child shows up. Was it a recent fight or disagreement with your partner? Was it with a family member? We know that some of those conversations with family can really just pull you way back into earlier experiences. Was it around work or was it even with your own child? Send me a DM on Instagram at Dr. Tracy D and let me know what that moment was because I want to hear from you before we go forward in today's conversation. Step two, I want you to recognize what your inner child needed back then. So we're not going to judge yourself. This is often what my clients do is when they start to tap into these things about themselves that they didn't get. So, that I'm not enough, I'm not lovable. Then what people start to do is, oh, I'm doing this again. They criticize themselves, they judge themselves, but instead ask yourself, what did I need in this moment as a child that I didn't get? So, for example, and I go through this in Be Connected, I do this in the attachment lesson. I do this in lesson 3, which is about you recognizing what's underneath your cycle, which is so important. So, Be Connected, for those who don't know, is my online relationship program. We have been up and running for 5 years, which is incredible. 5 years of supporting people all over the world to help build their relationships. So that's been incredible. But I walk you through in greater detail around core needs and longings that are often underneath the cycle. So here are just some that show up with the inner child. So one is if you feel small and unimportant, what is it that you need? One of those core needs might be to feel seen, might be to have validation. If you feel abandoned in those moments, then maybe this is about finding a sense of security and what that actually looks like. And you can find all kinds of ways to build security around that. But if you also then feel not enough, like in my case, then what are the ways that do make you enough? What are the things that help you feel okay with yourself? And can you start even acknowledging those things? And I'll pause my next thought to move forward. But now here's step 3. Step 3 is meet that need now as a child. How are you going to give this to yourself today? This might be through changing your inner dialogue, which is important. This is hard work and repetitive work. Again, it's like choosing new pathways, right? It's not enough to simply go, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. I'm enough. I am loved in the world." No, that's not enough. These are the moments where when you're really struggling, you say to yourself, "I am good. I am okay. My nervous system is sending me this message. Thank you for sending me this message. Inner child, I'm going to protect you. You are okay. I am enough. I am enough." It's about building self-compassion. Self-compassion, again, isn't just this one time, oh, I'm being kind to myself. No, it's a repetitive experience over and over and over again. And it might even be through, the Dr. Kristen Neff talks about the yin and yang of self-compassion and there's the softness and the kindness to it, but there's also the boundaries and the protectiveness of yourself. And that might even be about setting boundaries, but then also being able to make different choices. In that moment on the couch, this is where our partnerships can be so powerful. First, we have to let them in on what that inner struggle is, and we need to help them to see what's happening inside of us. That's one piece. And then the other piece is being able to ask them to help give what it is that we need. So one of the things I did that night when I was spiraling in my I'm not enough and I'm feeling myself right back into my childhood closet, I had said to him, and I'm trying to think. I think initially he might have started to give me some solutions and next steps of what to do. And I think I said, I know this is what you want to do right now in this moment. I just need you to tell me that I'm enough. Can you please just tell me that I'm enough? And he did. And he totally stepped out of that like problem solving fixer hat that he likes to put on, which I love that about him, by the way. And he then said, you are enough. You are enough. Look at all that you do. It was one of those moments where it's this reminder that when it comes to healing, we're not just doing it on our own, but we do it in partnerships. This reminds me of a story of one of my friends, actually. And, it's been really interesting. And I'd love to do a deep dive conversation on this around making friends in adulthood. And I do have an episode around friendships with Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. She's fantastic. She's a friendship expert. She's just so good. Friendships are so difficult, I think, and I don't think we talk enough about it. So making new friends as a mom has been challenging and interesting, and it's required vulnerability. And I remember this one time sitting with two of my now dear friends, and it was early on, and I had been vulnerable and shared something that I was personally struggling with. And I can't remember if it was in that moment. She had said, I saw you. I saw you be vulnerable and I'm really proud of you. How did it feel for you? I mean, those are just really cool full circle moments when someone steps out of that and just really acknowledges the things that you're doing. Okay, let's pause for a moment. Wherever you are, I want you to ask yourself this question. In those moments where my inner child is trying to take over the show, what is it that I need and long for? And what would it look like if I could start giving that to myself today? Okay, if you have your answer, let's keep going forward. I just want to spend a moment to talk about this term that we use, and I've already used it in this podcast actually, and that's around reparenting ourselves. And I've had this conversation with lots of people around this idea of how exhausting parenthood is, and we're busy parenting our kids, and then we're also reparenting ourselves, and then we're also trying to teach our own parents around boundaries and needs and individuation and autonomy. And this is often really challenging work. And it is such an interesting time to be in relationships because if we continue to bring forward curiosity and understanding and empathy, then that from that place, then we can continue to build relationships the way that we want them to be. So I want to just emphasize that this journey of reparenting, this idea of giving yourself the things that you didn't need so that you don't keep doing it to yourself. The idea that you get to be the adult here and you can be compassionate and you can speak kindly to yourself. The idea of creating safe, healthy relationships in your life and the part around learning how to express your needs and to set boundaries. That's all about this reparenting piece. And I think it's so important for us to not get into this shaming or blaming of ourselves or of our past, but instead to focus forward on there were things that I needed and I didn't get, and now how can I do this myself? The other piece that shows up around reparenting ourselves is also this layer of grief. And it's really an interesting experience sitting with clients when we're kind of on this edge of an emotion and they don't know what it is yet. And then I say, "Oh, I think what you're experiencing is grief." And it really resonates and it's really powerful to be able to give the feeling, the emotion, or the felt sense in our body to give it a name. It's like being thrown a life raft when you're like bobbing and treading water out in the sea. And it's so powerful then to be able to say, oh, that's right. That is exactly what I'm experiencing. And so part of our reparenting work is also making space to feel the grief and loss. And that is that we all have expectations of our partner or expectations of our parents or even, the experiences we would have in parenthood. And they don't always come true. And so part of our own work is allowing ourselves to have those emotions and then to work through, of course, the last stage of grief is now talked about in terms of making meaning. And that's so important is once we can accept that we didn't have these things, that we didn't get these things, and accept other people, then we can move forward into meaning making in our lives. All right, let's wrap up. I have a few takeaways for you from this conversation. So the first one is recognizing that we all have an inner child and that our inner child is this younger part of us that had emotional wounds or unmet needs and longings. And this part of you often shows up in moments of stress, uncertainty, and emotional pain. And if we don't identify and bring awareness to our inner child, we're going to find ourselves in repeating patterns over and over again and creating distance or disconnection in relationships. This might be in friendships. This could be with your own children. It could be with your partner, or even repeating cycles with your parents. The first step to healing is noticing when this part of you shows up and then being able to ask yourself, what is triggering this for me? What's happening in this moment? And then asking, what is it that I need? Such a powerful question. It's one of my go-to questions. I really came to asking myself that in my early postpartum days, asking myself, what do I need right now? Sometimes I even say, what do I need to be well in this moment? And to truly give that to myself. And then the last piece is recognizing that we're not just meeting these needs because you have needs and you want to meet them, but instead by meeting these needs today as an adult with agency and choice, you will change those patterns in your life and you're going to feel more secure and you'll have closer, more connected relationships. Remembering, if there's something that I want you to take away from today's conversation, I want you to think about those pathways in your brain, that well-traveled trail that you take. That's a path that you know it's been traveled for so many years. And oftentimes you take that path because it feels like you are right back to being 7 years old on your bed on your own, crying, or whatever that looks like for you. Me in my closet with my I'm not enough theme. And today, though, you really have this sense of agency and choice. Today, you get to do something different. All right, wrapping up. Thank you for joining me here. If anything stood out from today's conversation, send me a DM, let me know, or send me your question to be answered here on the pod, drtracyd.com/podcast. Leave me a review here, click the stars. These are so important pieces for helping others find the podcast and keeping the show going. So just take one moment. This takes just seconds for you to leave me a few words and click those stars. And of course, if you are looking for more support, if you're ready to deep dive into your relationship to build more connection and closeness, join me in my relationship program, Be Connected. Here I teach you all of the skills and tools I teach my clients inside my office every single day. Remember, you are right where you need to be. I have to remind you at the end of every podcast episode that this information is for educational purposes only and does not substitute for the care from a licensed mental health care provider. See you next time.